So we're going to have two very much related and contrasting panels today to get some additional perspective on the issues we've been talking about. In this first panel, we have a group of current educators so that we can get some on-the-ground perspective on what's happening with professional learning in schools and what opportunities and challenges they are seeing in their day-to-day lives. As you know, as was mentioned several times during this event, teachers' voices are often lost in discussions on education policy. So I think it's great that NCTAF and OECD has organized this panel. And then the second panel after this, no less important, we'll hear from some policy experts and individuals working on school improvement in various organizations to give us a better sense of the landscape around policy on teacher professional learning and how the TALIS data is maybe informing some of their work. So let me introduce this panel. I hope you don't mind, since we're running short on time, I'm just going to give their names and titles. The full biographical information is in the program. So the panelists here, this is our educator panel. We'll go, I guess, right to left. Your left. We have Christine Handy Collins, I'm really sorry, who's the principal of Gaithersburg High School in Maryland. Omari James is an English teacher at Quince Orchard High School in Maryland. Emily Davis, a teacher ambassador fellow at the U.S. Department of Education, and a former middle school teacher in Spanish at St. Augustine, Florida. Is it former or still?
It's kind of still.
Okay. Okay, maybe we could talk about that as we go. And Donald Belle is the environmental outreach educator at the William Schmidt Center in Prince George's County, Maryland. And he's a former high school science teacher coordinator in Brandywine, Maryland. So I'm going to jump right in to my questions for this panel of accomplished educators. We've heard some troubling things about professional learning in the U.S. teaching profession, but I wanted to start on an optimistic note. Find out what kind of positive trends are you seeing in professional development and support in your schools, either in your schools or in the profession in general. And if you had any examples you can give of experience you've had that you think would be enlightening to the kinds of things teachers really need at this time. Does anyone want? Emily, it looks like you're kind of...
I would love to jump in there. And please let me know if you can't hear me. So I just want to reflect a little bit on some comments that Randy made and also on the TALIS data as well, and that we talk about in the United States that there are a lot of opportunity for professional learning. And I think what the TALIS data shows, if nothing else, is that teachers in the United States are working really hard. When you're looking at 45 hours a week versus 38 hours a week on average with other countries, I think that that's an important takeaway for all of us. And some, just to speak to your question, of the trends that I'm seeing really do sort of center around teacher leadership. You're seeing educators, I think, for the first time in a long time, when they're feeling disenfranchised, actually organizing themselves and advocating for themselves and asking for a seat at the table to be a part of decisions such as, what does professional learning look like in my school? How can I be a part of that? And I really, we aren't really, I would, I guess, term myself as a teacher leader, and I'm looking at Omari, who's only been teaching 1 year, is in my eyes also a teacher leader, but seeing not just new teachers coming to the table to talk about professional learning and what are things that they need in their classrooms, but also veteran teachers who I spoke with one veteran teacher in Louisville, Kentucky a couple months ago, and she said, we were talking to her about professional learning and what kind of professional learning she wanted, and she said, this conference is the first time I have ever been to a conference where the teaching idea that I had and I brought to the table was the one that was being discussed. And that I'm always in meetings and I'm always in conferences where things are being pushed on me and at me. And helping teachers to think through what is it that you need, but offering them that time and that space to actually share those ideas. I think you're seeing trends like those happening in the United States.
So we want to get back to the idea of teacher leadership, but you're seeing more teacher voice being involved in...
Yeah, and I think that part of it too, I was in a school in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago, and some of the teachers in the school were saying, we used to just go to conferences and come back and then teach all of the other teachers what we taught at we were taught at the conference. And now there's sort of been this paradigm shift within our school where the principal has said, hey, why don't you go to this conference and come back with recommendations for how you think we should implement this school-wide. That small shift is a big shift, and I'm happy that Christine is on the panel today, because I think that the school leadership piece of this is very important to what can happen for educators specifically within their schools when it comes to professional learning.
Christine, does that ring true to you about the developments in your, as a school leader?
Yes, as a school leader, what I'm seeing now is that teachers are really, they value professional development. And that teachers are, as we have implemented PLCs across the county, so teachers are participating in professional learning communities, and it's been a few years now, and they are really starting to value that time with their colleagues. I think initially there's a little pushback because they weren't accustomed to being required to have this time to meet with their colleagues and talk about instruction. But now teachers are really valuing that time with their colleagues, and it's not just a department meeting. They are talking about student data, they are talking about instruction, and they really value that time together.
So an example of the kind of collaboration that we heard about earlier.
Yes.
Is often lacking in U.S. schools. Omari, I want to get you, since you are a new teacher, are there things that surprised you about?
Sorry to call you out.
We knew. Things that surprised you about professional learning, or that you were really, excited about or frustrated about?
Well, first of all, I am shaking with fear right now, being up here. But when I've come to these kinds of events and my opinion is going to be heard, I do like to reach out to other teachers and hear their thoughts as well, because I'm very much passionate about this idea of outreach and bringing everyone into the discussion as opposed to me being here by myself. And one of the things that I've noticed is when we have the large staff meetings and professional development sessions, it tends to be harder for all of the teachers to tune in because some of us don't feel like it necessarily relates to us. But one thing that Quince Orchard High School did, and I know a lot of other institutions do this as well, is they have, first of all, empowered a lot of the actual staff members to take on as leaders of these meetings. And instead of it being a massive one meeting for the entire school, they break it up into pertinent professional development sessions where the teachers get to choose which session they want to attend. It's still in the same time frame, but we all have different sessions. So there's smaller groups. The teachers have autonomy in deciding where they're going to be attending the sessions, and it's led by one of their coworkers. All in all, it ends up feeling a lot more relevant. It feels a lot more effective, and to the teachers, it feels like they're not being told to do something. It feels like they're being encouraged to investigate something that they have chosen as something they want to be a part of.
Okay. How often do those sessions happen during the year?
It depends. This year, we implemented something called Wired Wednesday, which at first was a session where we could get together, and there were different things like using Google Classroom or different techniques for Edline, depending on your ability with the technology, Chromebooks, for example. And that was, as the name implies, every Wednesday or every other Wednesday, as long as the calendar allowed it.
Okay, so okay. Donald, did you have anything to add on really positive experiences
Absolutely.
as a science
So,
teacher?
Definitely two specific programs that I've worked with within the last 5 years where I see great strides. One was with NCTAF called Learning Design Studios, and with that program was centered around a team of STEM teachers, but it provided the ongoing support needed in order to really turn it from a meeting into a professional learning community. Along with that came the idea of planning with workforce partners and experts. And that's one thing that I took from the STEM Learning Studio sessions into my current role as an outreach educator, is to reach out to the community and work with experts. So we work with anyone from NASA scientists to doctors from NIH. And what we found over time was that not only were we learning more about the content and being able to relay that to the students, but it changed the types of questions you ask in the classroom when you're communicating on an ongoing basis with an expert partner.
Okay, great. Yeah, pardon?
I just wanted to add to piggyback on Omari, what Omari said, is at the end of the school year, as I did let my teachers give feedback on what they wanted in professional development for next school year, and the number one thing they wanted was differentiated PD. So they do not want something where everybody has to go to the same thing, but they wanted differentiated professional development. That was the number one request.
Okay, interesting. How hard is that for you to implement as a school leader?
No, I don't think it will be difficult. I think it was very good to know
Yeah.
that that is their preference.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly we want teachers to differentiate in their classrooms. And so they're just asking the school leaders to do the same thing as we're planning for professional development, that all teachers are not in the same place. They don't all have the same needs. And so just as Omari was saying
Right.
that they did at their schools, certainly I should call up his principal, Carol Working, and take some advice on that.
Okay, so those are some positive experiences. So as we heard earlier, some of the data from TALIS, a lot of teachers in the U.S. are not very satisfied with the kind of professional development they get. So I wanted to ask you, from your perspective in schools, or recently in schools, what do you see as the main barriers to effective professional development? Why isn't this sort of thing happening in more schools more often?
I think that many times it's a lack of support and training. Running a professional learning community is one thing. Running an impactful and engaging and very focused professional learning community is quite another. There's been experiences in schools where I have been the leader of those really bad meetings, and just because I'm looking out and I made goals and I thought they were the right goals. I asked people what they wanted to talk about. We made a lesson plan. We ran it as a very thought out professional learning community. But at the end of the day, to Christine's point, when you survey folks after the fact, it might not actually be what they needed and what they're needing specific to their classrooms. And I think that it's important too that not just helping teachers to lead those types of professional learning communities, but actually training them and supporting them along the way is essential to making sure that they are impactful. And something else too, as an educator, is that I do understand the importance of compliance. I do understand that there are some laws that we need to sit down, and that is professional learning for the day that we need to learn about. And I understand instruction and content, and I need to be an expert in those areas as well. But I will say that in 12 years of teaching, I never once received content-based professional learning. And when I looked back at myself, that was a tough part of the reflection process I was going through, and I was like, this is unbelievable. And part of the reason I chose to come into this fellowship was because I was craving learning. I didn't really want to go back and get my doctorate. I was feeling like I didn't want to go sit in an academia world, that I wanted to just dive in and do some hands-on real world learning for me, Emily Davis, as a person and as an educator. Because I was feeling burnout, and so I think that there are fellowships and other things. This fellowship has been the best professional learning I could have ever asked for. It has single-handedly changed my life, and it actually helped me understand why I want to go back to the classroom. And so I think when you allow teachers to step up and step back when they're feeling that need to step out, and/or that need to just fill that craving, because as cliche as it is, we are lifelong learners, and I think that's something that we all crave and look forward to.
Omari, yeah.
Before I say this, I can't imagine doing anything else besides teaching. There are those days that you have where you wake up in the morning and you just don't want to get out of bed, or those days where the school day ends and the students finally leave the classroom, and then you just sit at your desk and stare for a while. But even as low as those days can be, there's nothing as enriching and empowering and fulfilling as teaching, in my perspective. Others may disagree, but I love this more than anything. When it comes to this question about barriers to effective professional development, even today, I feel so fortunate to be here, let alone, being on the panel, but even being in the audience, in attendance. I think, however, that if it's a Friday and you go to an event or you have a professional development that's fantastic and brilliant, the weekend passes, Monday comes around, And on any given day, you have 5 classes that you're going to teach. You have a student that's come in 2 minutes before the bell rings to tell you about a crisis happening. You have tests that you have to get through grading. You have 200 papers that are waiting at home for you, and then 200 more next to your desk. It's hard when you have to get back into that pace and rhythm to maintain that mentality of professional development and forward progress because you're just trying to progress. And so I think for effective professional development, you need effective and continuous support and feedback. Because without that, it's very easy for those moments to kind of fade into the woodwork.
Gets
Or
lost
into
in
the
the shuffle a
background.
bit, yeah. Donald, do you mind if I move on to you? So do you think policymakers and education leaders understand teachers' needs in terms of professional development? It sounds like there's some disconnect in both what Emily and Omari said.
Yeah, so, while I see strides, I also see some of the issues, and, it's been 13 years in the education profession for me that have existed, for those 13 years. And one was what you just mentioned, the number of mandates, at a particular time, on a teacher from either the building level or the content level or the district level can sometimes be daunting when you have to take a task list that, may be 100 items long and set aside an hour to kind of focus on an additional piece. When I say additional, oftentimes I think one of the barriers is that teachers see the professional development as, an additional piece on the plate. So where we can make connections, so for example, next generation science standards or Common Core, how do we connect that to an ongoing professional development such that the teacher sees it as vital to their work? And I think that can be a barrier, but one that can be overcome. And then another piece is, funding for incentives, both for students and teachers. So in my role now, I work with several teachers throughout Prince George's County, and I schedule professional development. And from year to year, depending on the budget landscape, sometimes it's a good outlook, and I'm able to provide professional development pay for after school, and sometimes not so much. And obviously, when we look at the 45 hours versus 38 hours, well, if the teacher's already working for 45 hours,
Right.
We have to remember that this is something in addition on to that 45 hours.
So it's a matter of time. And
Yes.
yeah. Are there other things that you want? Any of you want policymakers to know about professional learning, the teachers' needs? I mean, you have some of them here. Omari?
Before teaching, I was at the University of Maryland in College Park in their graduate program, and part of the deal was that we taught full-time with a mentor teacher, and then we went to graduate classes 2 to 3 nights a week, and then a Saturday class. And I kind of have come to think of some professional development in that way. Not that it's bad, the classes were fantastic, but going in, it can be a harder sell if it's after the 8 hours. As was brilliantly alluded to today, when you are mentally and emotionally exhausted for the day, it's hard to get a breather and then have to restart your engines. It's daunting, it's exhausting.
Okay. Christine, did you?
So I wanted to add that when you talk about the barriers to effective professional development, certainly time. We have to make time during the school day, as Omari is saying. And one of the things that we had in our budget, thank you, when Dr. Starr, as our superintendent, we had money provided for professional development subs. So I could bring in the English department and they would have substitutes, and we could do some content relevant professional development, Emily. And the teachers really, truly value that. Then, economic times get tough, and unfortunately, professional development is one of the first things on the chopping block. So I think we have to reevaluate, what we value. I know it's tough decisions when, a superintendent or, the decision makers have to cut budgets, but professional development during the day is where we really need the time and the money to do that.
So time and resources. So we will follow up on that when the policy panel comes up. I want to get back to this topic of collaboration, which everybody seems to agree is a positive force. There was this really interesting survey report from the Gates Foundation a few months ago, I'm sure a lot of you saw it, that found that, well, strong collaborative environments tended to benefit teachers. They were like them. Teachers were actually not very satisfied with the experiences in professional learning communities or with instructional coaching as they were receiving them. Now, I know this survey doesn't necessarily represent you, but it was surprising, caused a lot of consternation in the field. So I wanted to find out, why do you think, with all the talk about how great collaboration is, they were getting these collaboration formats that were not working for teachers? Does anyone have any input into why that might be? I mean, Emily, you might have touched on some of it before.
I mean, yeah, I think that a lot of times, for the sake of capacity, I mean, you're many times throwing teachers into those roles, and they haven't been trained or supported for what those communities could and should look like. And I think the other piece of this is that it's very specific to context, and that it's important to be mindful that, some models in some schools might have professional learning communities like Omari's that are great, and they work really well in that context. And I think a lot of times in education, though, we try to scale that, and that might not be what is the best for another school or even, another classroom even. So I think that you have to be mindful of scale and what works in some places and not others. And I think the other piece of this too is just seeing a shift in, a paradigm shift in professional development at this point in time is very much from a deficit model. It's very much from we're gonna come in and fix you, Omari, who needs help with classroom management. No, I don't think you do, but, but versus, thinking through solutions and again, just asking the educator, what do you need? I don't know how many times we actually go in and just ask the teachers and the educators in the school and the staff who are supporting these children, what would great professional development look like, to you? Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of times we're trying to do the right thing, and we think we're doing the right thing, but really, very, very rarely have we even asked our constituents what it is that they actually need.
So Christine, how do you know? I mean, as a school leader, how do you know that what you're offering is working or not working?
Well, certainly we have to get feedback from the teachers. We have to provide support. And I think that's what Emily is talking about. When you have a professional learning community, either there is an appointed leader or a leader rises. And so we have to train teacher leaders to support PLCs. And then you have to, one of the things that we found very successful is when my department chairs go into, and my assistant principals, when they go into PLCs and help them with the agenda. What are they expected to talk about? How do they utilize data to drive their discussions? We're asking teachers to do things that they have not been accustomed to doing. And it takes a while for them to really see the benefit of what is happening. So we can't give up on PLCs, because it takes a while for teachers to begin to value the benefit of being a part of a professional learning community. I mean, I think we all have done that, even as a principal and being a part of a PLC. It has taken a while for us really to value that time that we have together and how we use it. But so I think you got to support your teacher leaders, and you have to provide training, and then you have to inspect what you expect.
Anybody?
Yeah. So when I think of the best professional learning experiences, throughout my career, I think about opportunities that are ongoing, but in the best instances, there's time for evaluation and reflection. So not only, at a particular session, but throughout the year. The other piece where I see that professional learning communities are effective are when teachers are there from the development stage. So it's one thing to have teachers in the planning stages of the professional development to provide feedback from the very beginning, so that teachers can clearly see, and a lot of hands went up earlier when the question was posed, are there any former teachers in the audience? So teachers know when there's another teacher that has been at the table and at the professional development planning session for a particular meeting. So I would say those two things, the opportunities for reflection throughout and the flexibility to adapt the learning community based on individual and group needs, as well as having teachers there from the ground floor and in the planning session to help guide the objectives for the PLC or professional development.
Mm-hmm. So that issue that you're all kind of mentioning of teacher leadership, it's bandied about a lot these days. I want to explore a little bit of what that means and how these roles can be sustained and supported in schools, so that these kind of collaborative sessions are effective. Are there particular models you've seen where it works? Are there things that are standing in the way of that?
I think one model, and I don't know how familiar everyone is, that I personally very much enjoy is an ed camp. Ed camps are really just started where a bunch of teachers got together after school one day, and they kept meeting after school one day, and then they eventually were just talking about things that were happening in their classrooms. These were positive things, negative things, challenges, best practices, and because I think some of their time was taken away for formalized professional learning, they started moving the meetings to a Saturday. And so these teachers really would just come into school, go to each other's classrooms, and sit down in front of a whiteboard and just start, throwing up a bunch of stuff on the whiteboard. And what has come of that has been this very organized, grassroots and very autonomous professional development sort of learning structure. That folks now, the caveat is if you come into the room and you put the idea up on the whiteboard, that you in fact are going to be running that part of the discussion. And many times they're questions. I was just at an ed camp, and they've blown up. I mean, if they think they've had over 1,000 worldwide at this point, these are just really, we get together and we put up a board and we say, in this room, we're going to be, and there's blank slots, and you just put something up there, and then that ends up being where you go and what you talk about. And it's the rule of 2 feet. If you're sitting and talking with teachers and it's not really what you're looking for, then you get up and you go to another room. But these are their ideas. They're things that, again, they're grappling with, or best practices that they want to share. And I think one of the best ones I was just in was a principal came to one, and she put up on the board, how do I create a culture of yes at my school? And for me as a teacher to go and sit with another principal and other teachers that I don't even know, these were people from other schools and districts, and know that they're grappling with the same things that I'm grappling with, and that a principal actually came and felt vulnerable enough and had the humility to say, I'm having issues creating a culture of yes at my school. Can you all help me with that? There's a lot to be said for the expertise of educators, some who have been in education for 2 years or 6 months, and some who have been there for 30 plus years. So I think it's, again, the model of an ed camp, again, being just very grassroots, and it's your idea, and then we are just going to discuss. And you walk away with takeaways and resources and things that are actually useful when you go back to your context.
Okay. So Donald, how about you? You were a science teacher coordinator. How can administrators and policymakers better support teachers' growth over time and in leadership roles?
So I think that when looking at professional development, teacher leadership, the ongoing support is going to be key. And when I say that, just to provide an example, one of our professional development opportunities that we're running now is in conjunction with the Maryland Environmental Literacy Partnership. We have a group of teachers that are somewhere in Maryland right now learning content. And Friday, they're from LEAs all throughout the state. They'll come together to, discuss some of these issues. But up front, the expectation is that they will become ambassadors to other teachers throughout Prince George's County and throughout the state. And so the expectation is seeded very early that you're part of a larger initiative, and whether you become the teacher leader that runs the session, or if you speak on a particular content, there's a role for you in this initiative. And so I will actually meet with some of those teachers. I know where they are tomorrow. They're at Gwynn Park High School. I think they may be on Smith Island finishing up their experience today. But that's what I'll stress to them actually tomorrow. is that, up front, this is your first week of the program, but this is an ongoing, and we'll have PLC sessions throughout the year, but there are many roles to play. And letting teachers over the course of time find those roles or switch roles, if you see that, is pretty important.
Okay. Omari, since you mentioned Wired Wednesdays, right? I want to talk about technology a little bit. Do you think schools are doing enough to leverage technology in professional development, digital learning environment? Are there things that you think they could do more of?
When I got my master's degree, my thesis was on the effective use of video games in the classroom. You might have noticed.
A perfect person to ask.
I was actually very critical of my own thesis because I think that we have a tendency as educators to, when it comes to technology, fall into a trap of gimmicks and shine, and we don't necessarily develop or give time to the process to really develop it into something effective. At the same time, I think in education at large in the U.S., we seem to have a problem with changing things to reflect that kind of technology. For example, the entire philosophy behind technology in the classroom is this idea of new literacy, which emphasizes that students do not only read from books anymore, not paper books, that is. Even, in fact, right now, I have a Kindle that I'm using for all of my notes, and, we are encouraged to use Twitter and everything, and that takes a certain new literacy savvy. Students are infinitely better versed at this than we are, and I think that we need to improve our classrooms to be able to reflect that a little more, honestly.
Okay. Anybody else on technology, how well it's being used in professional learning? Christine?
Well, one of the things that we moved to a lot this year, because we have Chromebooks in our schools and in our classrooms, and making sure that the teachers begin to use the Chromebooks, but also using the Google platforms. And so in order to model what we want teachers to use in their classrooms and to encourage them that there are other ways of doing things today, we are modeling that when we do professional development, when we have meetings. So for instance, when I'm having a meeting, I'm no longer using chart paper. We have the Chromebooks in front of everyone at a leadership team meeting, and so when we want to collect people's feedback, everybody is using the Chromebooks, and we see it coming up on the screen, and then we can easily save it, so now I don't have to put it on chart paper and do walk-arounds and all that. So we have to model it within our staff meetings and our training and our leadership team meetings, what teachers can do in the classroom. And so when they see that done in a meeting, then they're saying, oh, they will start turning to how they can use that in their classroom. So throughout the things that we're doing, we're exploring these things and then modeling it so that the teachers can utilize this in their classrooms. We have some teachers, we have found that many of our teachers or some of our teachers are well versed in doing a lot of great things in their classrooms. So we are doing something similar to what Omari was talking about in having those teachers to have lunch and learns. So teachers will come down during lunchtime. If it's another teacher, saying, hey, I want to show how to do this, we're seeing more teachers coming together on their own time when another teacher is sharing a best practice.
Okay, so Omari?
I think that's a perfect example of something that a lot of us educators know, but I think it's something that always bears reinforcing is at the beginning of the year when the Chromebooks went into practice, in effect, a lot of teachers were like, oh, this is the end. This is going to be terrible. It's going to be a mess because we're used to our computer labs. This is ridiculous. But by the end of the year, all of those teachers had changed their tune. Ladies and gentlemen, with education, we have this style where we kind of move on to things a little too quickly. We don't give things a fair shake, right? But with technology, as with a lot of these other PLC opportunities and professional development, it's going to be rough in the beginning because it's different. It's not it doesn't necessarily fit with what we're used to. However, given the time, We expect our students, even with critical thinking and analysis, they don't weightlifters, right? They don't get better by lifting what's light. Same thing with students in the classroom as well as with teachers. Improvement and innovation comes through doing what's difficult.
Okay.
So give it the time to grow, right?
Right. Okay. We're going to turn to the audience if you have questions for our educators. We have a mic coming around. Please wait for the mic, and if you could give us your name and your organization.
Yeah, hi, this is really fascinating. My name is Mindy Reiser. I'm a sociologist. I did some work with the Department of Education. We did a big study on educators' views of education research. This was a number of years ago. We learned a lot. First a comment and then a question. A comment, a friend of mine is an attorney. She's Hispanic in Texas. Her daughter has become a young teacher. She was crying and devastated after a couple of months and just was overwhelmed and asked me, who is a non-teacher, what to do, and I referred her to NEA in this case, but it could have been AFT. And that was really upsetting to me that there was no immediate support there. Question to you, I have another friend who is a teacher and takes advantage of a lot of these summer seminars. NEH has this, all kinds of professional associations, teachers of English and that sort of thing. She's gone to a lot. Talk a little bit about these summer opportunities. They may be for a week or two in residence. What happens afterwards? I kind of have a feeling that not too much. I don't know how much continuity that is, but there is content there. Emily, I was really struck by what you said. And it's incredibly nutritious. But for how long? How long is that sustained?
I think the Summer Institute piece is critical because it gives you a chance to sit with people who are like you, especially when, because I was a Spanish teacher, I was on this lone island. I didn't know any others. I was the only Spanish teacher in my school, and I didn't know many for miles. And so I would try to seek out places like that. But I think the first hurdle is that you have to know about it. As a teacher in California, New York, and Florida, I was not associated with many national professional networks, and I didn't know about a lot of those opportunities. So I think that's the first hurdle we have to overcome. But I think to Omari's point, when you're teaching every single day and you're tired, it doesn't really give your brain a chance to absorb new learning. And so the summer is the time when we do restart, when I do want to go and sit with people who are like me and just really talk and dig into content. And as much as there is not, there definitely is a break, but when you come back to school in the fall, I think a lot of what you have learned from that Summer Institute, depending on what it may be, I'm thinking specifically about my international baccalaureate training. I would go in June, and I would always have a plan. I think that's the important piece. The different institutes need to make sure that teachers are walking away with logic models and action plans and things that when you go back in September and you pull that thing out and you go, oh yeah, I said in the first 6 weeks, these were my 3 goals, that it shouldn't just be you sitting there for the sake of getting content, but that you're actually making a plan for your fall semester, whether that be 6 or 9 weeks into it. And that, when I had a plan, I know I implemented a lot better.
Any other? We have time for one more question in the audience.
And I'd love to talk to your niece if she wants, or your crying daughter.
Anybody else?
Granddaughter.
Yeah, sir.
I want to make a comment on what Randy said, if that's okay.
Sure.
So to me, a crucial comment of Randy was that, where's this? With the improved curriculum, like Common Core Math, so this is being implemented without teachers having the time to learn it. And in the last decade, it's been, let's teach arithmetic with calculators as opposed to people actually having to know arithmetic. And now, suddenly they have to know arithmetic, but at least in my state of Maryland, until recently, probably now, to become a fully licensed middle school math teacher, you did not have to know how to add fractions, like a half and a quarter. So now, one way to have the teachers not in this trap would be if the states would change their licensing test to actually require that teachers know the content. And if they would do that, the colleges would change the courses they provide to teachers so that the teachers would know the content, and then they could pass the state test. And then if there's a change in the curriculum, well, they already know it. So this problem, this really big problem now that she raised could have been avoided and should be addressed down the road.
By improving licensing exams. Real quick, did you have something quickly?
I'm Alex Fuentes. I teach high school biology in Alexandria. And I'm just wondering if anybody on the panel has had good quality professional development on how to teach reading and how to teach writing, because I have not. I did not receive that training when I was in college studying to be a high school science teacher. And as far as I know, unless you teach in elementary school, teachers are not trained on how to teach reading and writing. So I see that as a gap, and wondering if anybody here has had that training or professional development.
Interesting point. We got to be really quick, but go on.
I would like to make it very clear, as a teacher of 11th grade AP Language and Composition, as well as 9th grade Honors English, no. No. I haven't had that training either. And when I went through my master's program, I was actually a bit terrified by that. And, truth be told, we can't expect to, based on our grade level, never have a student that needs that basic training or education, because it will happen. It will happen, and it has happened. And I think it's unfortunate for a teacher to come to that place where they have to face that and have nothing to draw from. But it happens.
So that's a really important content gap in teacher prep and professional development. Okay. Can we? Okay, we need to. So I want to say thank you to our educators up here, Donald, Emily, Omari, and Christine.